Recently in the EMLA Stage 1 playoffs, which is basically the qualifiers for the Esports World Cup 2026, G2 missed the Esports World Cup. This got me thinking, G2 Esports never learned from their mistakes. For years, G2 Esports has been one of the biggest names in Rainbow Six Siege, whether they were dominating the world during their legendary dynasty or rebuilding it after it ended. One thing always remained the same. Whenever G2 falls behind in any competition, their first instinct is always the same: signing another superstar. On paper, it makes perfect sense. If you're one of the biggest esports organization on planet Earth, why wouldn't you go after the best player available? The problem is that Rainbow Six Siege has never been won by simply collecting the biggest names. It's won by building a team, and that's exactly where G2 Esports had repeatedly made mistakes. To understand why G2's current roster has already failed to qualify for the Esports World Cup 2026, we first have to go back a few years. After the era of the back-to-back SA champs came to an end, G2 found themselves in an unfamiliar territory. For the first time ever, they weren't the best team in Rainbow Six Siege, so naturally they wanted to climb their way back to the top again as quickly as possible. So instead of slowly building another championship roster, G2 started looking for superstars. First, it was UUNO, one of the scariest fraggers in the world at the time. Then it was Virtue, who had established himself on Fnatic as one of the most explosive entry players in the world. Then CTZN, the Pro League champion with Navi and arguably the hottest fragger at the time. In theory, the roster looked incredible. Pengu, Kantoraketti, UUNO, Virtue, and CTZN. Almost everybody called it a super team before they even played their first official match. But despite all the individual talent, the results never matched expectations. For a roster with that much firepower, winning only the GSA League was a massive disappointment. The biggest problem wasn't that these players suddenly became bad. Many of them would go on to prove that they were still top-tier players after this era. Kanto joined Rogue and won the Berlin Major in 2022, Virtue stayed with G2 through the rebuild and eventually lifted the 6th Invitational hammer in 2023. CTZN remained as one of the most feared players in Europe, same with UUNO, and Pengu just retired. Even players outside of this specific Superteam project tell a similar story. Take Cryon for an example. When G2 signed Cryon, they were once again bringing in another mechanically gifted fragger.
He's got a triple kill so far, a fourth going the way of Shade. Cryon can just do things like this.
But instead of fully utilizing what made him dangerous, they had him taking responsibilities that were never his biggest strength. But could he do it? Sure, of course, it's Cryon, he can do it. Professional players can adapt. But that's not the point. The point is that G2 kept signing players because of what they were best at, only to ask them to become something else once they arrived. That raises an important question. Was G2 actually solving their problem? Or were they just adding more talent and hoping everything would sort itself out? Fast forward to today, and it's hard to not notice the similarities. This new G2 Superteam roster reminds me of what they did back in 2020. Doki, Benjamaster, Alem4o, Stompn, and Shaiiko. If you rank these players individually, you'd struggle to find any roster better than this one. But just like before, most of these players built their reputation by playing aggressive roles. These players create openings, they take initiatives. These are the players who can win rounds on their own. There is nothing wrong with having one or two players with these traits on your team. Shopify Rebellion is a great example for this one. They have Spoit and Ambi, two of the most aggressive players in the world on one roster, and they kind of had the success with it on the Salt Lake City Major. The problem comes when almost everyone on the roster thrives in similar situations, because eventually someone has to give something up. Someone has to spend more time enabling the team rather than chasing highlight clips. For years, G2's solution to almost every setback has been signing another superstar. Instead of asking, what does the roster need? The question often seemed to be, who's the biggest name available? Those are two completely different approaches to building a team. One builds chemistry, the other builds headlines. But does that automatically mean signing Shaiiko was a mistake? Absolutely not. But the results once again force us to ask the same question G2 has been facing for years. Did they build the best team, or did they just gather around the best collection of players they could find? Because mostly, those aren't the same thing. The good news is that this story isn't over. Unlike the previous super team, this roster has already a championship foundation. Doki, Alem4o, and Benjamaster, who returned to G2 once again. Three players who won the 6th Invitational 2023 together. Now, they've been joined by two of the most mechanically gifted players in the world, Shaiiko and Stompn. Their potential is obvious. They can absolutely win matches. They even proved it to everybody in the EMLA Stage 1 group stage. They topped the group stage with 24 points, tied with Virtue's Pro. But they messed it up in the playoffs where it mattered the most. The answer is that G2 doesn't need more talent. They've had enough of it for years. What they need is an identity. And until they find one, they'll keep proving that in Rainbow Six Siege, the best players don't always make the best team.